So we've heard some rather scathing reviews about this locomotive, and you're all wondering what on earth was I thinking purchasing one of these locomotives. Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. And as you can see, I've made a crazy decision and bought one of these KR Models Leader class locomotives. Now, I haven't been waiting for 4 years as a lot of other folk have. I just happened to stumble across it on the Rails Sheffield website and was quite surprised, obviously, to see it there, and I couldn't resist because this is such an unusual locomotive. So I purchased this locomotive just before Christmas from Rails Sheffield, and it arrived just the other day. Now, in the meantime, while I was waiting for it to be delivered, I thought, let's see if there's any reviews on this locomotive, and at that point I realised, gosh, I think I might have made the wrong decision buying this locomotive, because there is some rather scathing reviews out there. So some of the issues reported include wheels falling off, detail parts falling off, no brake rigging accessories, the coal load looking ridiculously oversized and not fitting correctly in the coal bunker, and other incorrect prototype issues as well in terms of replicating the original locomotive. So the box arrived, and of course I was too scared to actually open it, so I actually left it for a few days, and only today have I plucked up the courage to open it. And of course the first thing I had to check was that all the wheels were still attached to the axles, and unbelievably and very fortunately all my wheels were actually intact, so it was a good start. Now, I'll be honest and say the only issue I actually found, there was certainly no extra parts floating around in the ice cube or anything like that. The only issue was one of the whistles above the cab windows at one end of the locomotive had been glued on at a 45-degree angle, which I'm sure is not correct. I tried to straighten that and it just immediately snapped off. So apart from that, that's the only issue. In general, I'm actually relatively happy with this locomotive in terms of its build quality and its detailing. Unlike some of the reviews I've seen where the disc indicator brackets are all buckled and bent or snapped off or missing, I haven't really noticed any issues like that. Some of the brackets are a bit wonky. They're certainly not perfectly straight, but at least they are intact. So as you can see, I've got it on the rolling road, and rather than risk running it in around the actual layout at this point, I've been running it in on the rolling road. So once this is complete, the plan is to let it loose on my layout, and I guess cross my fingers that it's going to run okay, because some reviews have reported that the running qualities is absolutely shocking. And of course, one of our prolific review channels, Sam's Trains, unfortunately the model he purchased, I think, was truly a lemon, because as soon as it hit any curves, third radius, second radius, it just slowed down to almost a stall. So I'm hoping that my particular model that I've got here is going to operate okay. Now, I don't have second radius, so the minimum radius I have is third radius, so theoretically it should be, well, hoping it should be okay. So you're probably wondering why on earth I bought this locomotive anyway, because it's not part of my era, so late 50s through to the early 70s, and of course this locomotive, it was decommissioned in the early 50s, so and it was well gone by the time my era began. But I'm going on this basis that what if it was reasonably successful? What if this locomotive had some merit to it when it was introduced back in the late 40s? So I'm going on that basis, and that's the reason why I've chosen the BR black livery, because interestingly at one point the prototype was painted black ready for the BR black livery, and then at the last minute they actually decided, no, let's go for photographic grey. So based on that, and just with my sheer curiosity and fascination with this locomotive, it's a welcome addition to the station road layout, and it's certainly going to create some interesting running shots here and there. So the only other issue that I can foresee with running this locomotive on my layout is the height clearances. Now I have some pretty low height clearances on the lower level. There is a point motor in one particular place that I have actually adjusted and raised up because the 9F locomotives would get stuck on it. Now I've checked this locomotive against a 9F and it is slightly higher, and that is because of the coal load in there. So if the coal load passes underneath this point motor, then that's fine, but if it doesn't, then I'm going to take this coal load out and replace it. But in saying that, actually I'm going to take the coal load out anyway, because it is probably one of the most badly thought out parts of this locomotive. I'll be honest, it is completely unrealistic, and the way it's been conceived is pretty horrible. You can get away with it, I think, a little bit better on the BR black version, because it sort of blends into the livery, whereas I've seen the coal loads on the photographic grey liveries, and it just looks terrible. It's just so badly thought out. So I'm going to take this coal load out anyway, I think, but I do, for curiosity's sake, I do want to see whether it will actually pass underneath this point motor on the lower level. So I'm going to leave this to run for the remainder of its 30 minutes in this direction, and then we'll get it onto the station road layout and we'll just see how it goes. Fingers crossed. So I can breathe a sigh of relief, because this locomotive doesn't appear to have any issues with any of the curves on this layout. Now there are some third radius and fourth radius curves that it navigated, plus also some point work and crossings and double slips and things like that, and it had no issues whatsoever. Now the coal load did make contact with the underside of that point motor I mentioned, but it still managed to get past it. But just to be on the safe side, I did take the coal load out, and of course I could no longer hear it making contact, so the coal load is definitely going to be changed out for something a little bit more realistic and low profile. And then the only other hindrance I actually came across was a supporting rod for an upper level that is near the curve in the track. Now I didn't have any issues with this supporting rod with any of my other locomotives. This is actually the first locomotive that actually collides with it, and although the locomotive still gets past, it is quite a thump as it tries to squeeze past this rod. Now that actually comes down to the fact that this locomotive, obviously, it has the largest overhang at the cab ends. So clearly it's well beyond any other locomotives I have. The overhang is quite extensive. So obviously the pivot and the bogies is possibly further back towards the central part of the locomotive than it is further out to the front, which causes obviously the locomotive at the cab ends to really overhang quite considerably. So if you've got second radius curves and you've got structures and so forth in close proximity, you may run into issues with that overhang. Now, I'm not classing this episode as a review as such. I'm not going into really in-depth details about the locomotive. There is indications of some sloppy workmanship when you look at the locomotive very close up. With the camera you can see fingerprints and there's glue marks, glue blemishes here and there, but of course you really do need the camera zoomed in on to be able to see these things. So in a nutshell, as I said previously, I'm actually reasonably happy with it. In terms of its running quality, it's great, it goes around the curves, but I think there's two things. It may either need a little bit more running in, because I notice that it sort of has a slight jerky motion to it as it runs along, or it could be something to do with the DCC decoder, because I have come across this before where you can encounter issues with back EMF and the locomotive actually runs with this sort of very subtle jerky motion. So I'm going to try a few things out and just see whether it is the back EMF or whether over an extended period of running it will actually smooth itself out. So under a bit of load, the locomotive didn't really struggle at all. It worked quite nicely up my 2 to 3% inclines that I have here on the station road layout. And as always, while I'm running rolling stock around the layout while the camera's running, 9 times out of 10 something goes wrong. Trains derail, couplings get tied up in knots and things like that. But in this situation it ran beautifully around the layout. There were no issues whatsoever. I did pay close attention to this jerky motion as well while under load. That didn't really change at all. So I am going to, as I said, probably look at the decoder itself and actually look at the CV settings, particularly the back EMF. It could be an issue there because the track is clean, so all of this track has been cleaned prior to running this locomotive on the layout, so there's no issues there. And there is actually a massively large capacitor built into this locomotive, so it actually has a very good inbuilt stay alive capacity to it. So I don't think it's anything to do with the track or the electrical connectivity to the locomotive. It's either, as I mentioned, the CV settings, or there could be something in the transmission. So there we have it, the KR Models Bulleid Leader class locomotive. Now, I wasn't originally going to do a video on this particular locomotive, regardless of the outcome of my experiences with this purchase, but I thought after my initial experiences with the purchase that I've made, I actually decided I would provide a potentially slightly fairer view of the KR Models Bulleid Leader, because I certainly haven't experienced maybe as many of the issues that others have. So I think for these manufacturers, and particularly for the more small-time manufacturers, they can probably breathe a sigh of relief when maybe somebody actually does a, well, I guess in my case this is not a review, but at least the comments are slightly more favourable than the majority of comments that are sort of going around at the moment about this particular locomotive. So I definitely still think KR Models have got some homework to do when it comes to, well, this model, and I believe also the previous model as well, the FEL locomotive as well. I think they had some major issues. Now, whether or not they sort of take all that on board when it comes to the next model, whatever that might be, I'm not too sure. So obviously I'm going to take a look at the jerky motion that this particular model of mine seems to have, and I will do a catch-up video on the outcome that I reach with that particular issue. So I certainly hope you found today's episode interesting and potentially useful if you're sitting on the fence wondering whether to buy one of these locomotives. So do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.